I think perception always faces the same problem, which is at the sensory transducers like our eyeball or our fingertips or the ear. We have thousands of cells that receive little bits of information. So for the eyes, the retina inside the eye is like a grid of cells, each gets a little point of light. And from those points of light, we need to recognize objects. Is it a boat? Is it a table? Is it a chair? Is it an old friend? Now, to do that, we need to connect each of these bits of light together and create a contour, create a shape, create a form. And once we've created a form, we need to recognize that the same form retains its identity even as we see it from different perspectives. So if I see you, Angelina, from one view and then from another view, I need to recognize that it's still you. So somehow from points of light, we need to move to something that is sufficiently invariant, sufficiently abstract that we can achieve recognition. But to get from little points to something that's going to be constant across different viewing positions, we need to pass through an intermediate level. So the intermediate level of perception is the level that brings together all of these little points and presents the world from a particular point of view. And that way of presenting the world, seeing things as they are positioned in space and time, is very important for organisms like us, because that presentation of the world is very useful for action. So if I see a tiger moving towards me, or a polar bear moving towards me in the Arctic, I need to recognize that it's a polar bear, and I also need to see how it's positioned relative to me. Is it facing me? Is it close to me? It's at the intermediate level of perception that we're able to retain all of the information about identity while also retaining this information about perspective. So consciousness, I think, is fundamentally about action. It's about choosing what to do here and now. Consciousness is for dealing with the world in the present. And the intermediate level of perception is the only level of perception that creates coherence. It brings these points of light together, but also retains perspective, which is crucial for deciding how I need to react. I don't want to say most important. I think experiments are very connected to philosophy. To conduct an experiment, you first need to have a question. You need to be interested in solving a problem. And then you need to have a theory that you're trying to test. And then you need to have a view about what evidence would support that theory. Now, all of these things are philosophical. Philosophers ask questions. Philosophers construct theories. Philosophers use logic to determine what would count as support for a theory. So you can't even begin to conduct an experiment without doing a lot of philosophy. So to ask, is experimentation a better method, I think is already based on the assumption that experimentation and philosophy are different methods. I think they're intimately connected. But the real question then becomes, does philosophy benefit from including experimental methods? And here I think the answer is obviously yes. If you're interested in any question, you should look at any method that can help answer that question. If you're constructing a philosophical theory of how the mind works, are we free, are we not free? A theory of how consciousness works. Do we have conscious experiences as a result of brain states or as a result of something else? You are in effect developing a theory of how the world works, what's true in the world. And to understand what's true in the world, you can't simply reflect. You can't simply use your cognitive abilities to try and understand these questions conceptually. You need to observe. And experimental methods are fundamentally a method of observation. So to try to answer these questions without experimentation is like putting a blindfold on. It's a way of limiting your opportunities for the discovery of facts about how the world is organized. Experiments add to philosophy an extremely important source of information and confirmation. We have philosophical debates that date back 2,000 years. We have philosophical theories that have led to conflicts of views that have not been resolved, where people have tried to settle the issue through intuition. And when we get to a point where we don't find resolution, we don't find one group of philosophers convincing another group of philosophers, it's extremely helpful to try and determine whether these two views are actually making different predictions about what we can observe experimentally. So I think experiments emerge as another tool that we can use to help settle philosophical debates. The cruise has been wonderful. I was very excited to come to Greenland because I knew it was a place I was unlikely to visit, but always wanted to visit. It's a very remote part of the world, and so much of my life is driven by professional needs, so I travel to go to conferences, to go to universities. The idea that we could have an academic event in this setting is almost unimaginable. So for me it's a kind of dream. But much more than that, I think it's been an extremely rewarding experience because of the people who are here. The organizers were really showing a tremendous amount of courage and I think creativity to bring together people who disagree, people who fundamentally disagree about the nature of the mind. And to try and orchestrate a conversation between these different sides is an enormously valuable and illuminating opportunity for all of us. But much more than that, we have in Western Europe and in North America a tendency to have conversations with ourselves. So we've too long entered into philosophical discussions with very familiar conversation partners, sharing ideas that we all know from reading each other's work. And I think this cruise represents the inauguration of a new series of conversations. I think Russia and Western Europe, Russia and the United States, each have great intellectual histories, each have great institutions of higher education, and have tragically, because of political differences of the recent past, not engaged in the kind of dialogue that would be most fruitful. So for me, the cruise symbolizes not just an advance on these specific topics of consciousness and free will, but the opening up of a possibility of a much richer and continuous exchange of ideas over the years to come.